She was sitting alone at the corner of a dimly lit bar, tears streaking her cheeks, nursing a drink that barely touched her grief. Memories of her ex haunted every sip, every glance at the empty seat beside her. And then, without warning, a hand appeared with a tissue, a simple act that would unravel her carefully constructed world. The man who offered her comfort was no stranger. He was someone she never expected, her boss. Hello, my friends. I am Olivia, and this is Olivia's Love Stories. I hope you enjoy this story. It had been one of those days where the weight of the world seemed to sit squarely on my shoulders, and no amount of retail therapy or mindless scrolling through my phone could lift it. I had just broken up with Jason, again, and somehow, despite the breakup being months in the making, the pain still hit like a punch to the chest. His betrayal, his empty apologies, and the ease with which he seemed to move on left me hollow. I found myself wandering into a small, quiet bar on the edge of downtown, the kind with amber lights that made the world feel softer and the edges of heartbreak slightly bearable. I barely noticed the low hum of conversations around me or the clinking of glasses. My attention was consumed entirely by the sting in my chest, the replay of every word he'd said, every careless touch that once felt like home. I slid onto a stool at the far end of the bar, desperate for anonymity, desperate to hide the mess of emotions I refused to share with anyone else. My hands trembled as I lifted the glass, the bitter taste of whiskey doing little to drown the memories. I barely noticed the bartender cleaning glasses behind the counter, nor the soft murmurs of other patrons laughing quietly with friends. I was consumed by my own private storm. A sudden shadow fell across my hands. I looked up, startled, and saw a man standing there, holding out a single napkin. "Here," he said softly, You look like you need this." His voice was calm, reassuring, and there was something familiar about the way he stood, like he had every right to be here, watching, waiting, offering help. I blinked through my tears, fumbling for words, my throat tight, and then it hit me. The recognition came like a jolt of electricity. I had seen this man in board meetings, in email threads, in the fluorescent-lit corridors of my office. He was my boss, not some random stranger, not some night in a bar-lit moment of chance, my actual, very composed, very intimidating boss. My fingers froze as they reached for the tissue. My heart hammered against my ribs like a frantic drum. The noise of the bar, the laughter, the music, the low murmur of conversations seemed to fade completely, leaving only the sound of my own ragged breathing. And then his eyes met mine. I wanted to look away, to hide, to disappear completely, but I couldn't, because in that moment, I realized that something about him, something I'd never noticed before, was different. It wasn't just concern. It was something warmer, something sharper, something that made the air between us feel charged with possibility. And just as I lifted the tissue, my hands still shaking, he leaned slightly closer. I felt my chest tighten as his presence loomed closer. The napkin hovered between us like a fragile bridge over the chasm of my heartbreak. My mind raced, trying to reconcile the man I had feared in board meetings with the one standing here, offering comfort with gentle, unassuming kindness. "Are you okay?" His voice was low, careful, carrying a weight of concern that I had never imagined he possessed. Normally, my boss was all sharp angles and clipped sentences, the kind of person who seemed untouchable, impervious to human frailty. Yet here he was, kneeling slightly to meet my gaze, every inch of his demeanor soft and approachable. I wanted to say no. I wanted to tell him I was fine, that I didn't need anyone's pity, especially not his. But the words caught in my throat, tangled with the sobs I had been holding back. My hands shook as I took the tissue from him, brushing it lightly against my cheeks. The warmth of his hand lingered for a moment, and a strange, unfamiliar comfort bloomed inside me. Thank you, I whispered, barely audible. He gave a small, knowing smile, one that wasn't patronizing, but somehow understanding. You don't have to explain, he said. And then, almost casually, everyone has nights like this, even people you'd least expect. His words sank into me, and I realized with a pang how isolated I had felt. I had been carrying this pain alone, wearing a mask of composure during office hours, pretending that life was fine while every heartbeat screamed otherwise. And now, here he was, my boss, a man I had admired from afar but never truly known, standing in a quiet bar, showing me something I had forgotten existed: genuine human empathy. The bar seemed to shrink around us. Conversations blurred into static, glasses clinking sounded distant, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a crack in the wall I had built around myself. I wanted to reach out, to speak, but the words tangled up in my chest. My gaze fell to the floor for a moment, and when I looked back, he was studying me with an intensity that made my skin prickle. "Do you want to talk?" he asked carefully, as if offering me a lifeline. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed violently in my pocket. I ignored it at first, too caught in the strange, suspended reality of this moment. Then another buzz, and another. Messages from Jason flashed across the screen, each one more desperate than the last, each one a reminder of why I had ended things in the first place. I felt my chest constrict, a mixture of fear, relief, and something unnameable swirling inside me. I looked back at him, this man who had shown up unbidden, who had broken through my armor without even trying, and I realized that the world had shifted in a single, imperceptible moment. And then, just as I thought I might finally speak, finally confess some of the mess of feelings I had been drowning in, he reached across the small table, brushing a loose strand of hair behind my ear. His hand lingered, warm, grounding, and I knew I was utterly exposed in a way I hadn't been with anyone before. I swallowed hard, words failing me again, my heart thundering with a mix of panic and anticipation. And in that exact instant, the room seemed to hold its breath, as if the universe itself was waiting for my next move. Because in that moment, I realized something terrifying and exhilarating. I could no longer see him just as my boss. He was something entirely more dangerous and entirely more captivating. The next few seconds stretched into eternity. His hand lingered near my face, warm against my skin, and I realized my pulse was betraying me, thundering loudly enough that I was certain he could hear it. My mind spun in a dizzying tangle of disbelief and desire. How could the man I had spent months avoiding emotionally, because of office hierarchies, because of fear, suddenly feel like the only person in the world I could truly lean on? I don't know what to say, I whispered, my voice breaking under the weight of everything I had been holding in. You don't have to say anything, he replied softly, his eyes locking with mine in a gaze that seemed to strip away all pretenses. Just breathe. I did. Tentatively, slowly. The air around me seemed to shimmer, charged with the strange electricity of possibility. The hum of the bar returned gradually, voices threading back into my awareness, but they felt distant, like background music to a scene where nothing else mattered. And then he spoke again, almost too quietly for me to hear. I've noticed you've been hurting, even at work. I didn't want to interfere, but I also couldn't just walk by. I blinked, surprised at the depth of his observation. My heartbreak, my carefully hidden vulnerability, hadn't gone unnoticed. Somehow, this man, my boss, had seen right through the walls I had built. I wanted to look away, to retreat into the comfort of anonymity, but something in his steady gaze anchored me. "Why? Why are you here?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He hesitated, as if weighing how much to reveal. Then he leaned back slightly, a small, rueful smile curving his lips. Let's just say, I've learned that sometimes the people who need help the most don't ask for it. And sometimes it's worth the risk to show up anyway. Risk. That word lingered in my mind, because yes, this was dangerous. This was dangerous, forbidden, complicated, and layered with professional boundaries I had no right to ignore. Yet in that moment, I realized I didn't care about any of it. Not really. All I could feel was the magnetic pull of his presence, the unexpected tenderness, and the quiet understanding that he was not like anyone else I had ever known. A nervous laugh escaped me, low and shaky. "You make it sound so simple." He shook his head, just slightly. "It's never simple." And then, as if the universe wanted to test me, a shadow of someone else appeared in the corner of my vision. Another patron glanced our way, and I felt the heat of sudden self-awareness, the vulnerability of being caught in a moment that wasn't supposed to exist. I wanted to pull back, to retreat to the safety of my drink, my solitude, but I couldn't, not while he was still there, still offering more than comfort, offering possibility. Then it happened, the moment that changed everything. His hand brushed mine, not by accident, not in passing, but with intention. Just a fleeting touch, yet it carried with it an electric weight that made my breath hitch. My heart stuttered. My mind screamed warnings. And yet, I felt a thrill I hadn't felt in years, a dangerous, intoxicating hope that maybe, just maybe, something could grow out of this moment. I swallowed hard, aware that this was the point of no return, that the boundary between professional and personal, safety and desire, had blurred in a single fleeting touch. And as our eyes locked again, I realized I was standing at the edge of something I couldn't predict, but something I could no longer ignore. The warmth of his hand on mine lingered longer than it should have, sending shivers at my spine. I wanted to pull away, to retreat to the safety of my broken heart and solitude, but I couldn't. Something in his gaze held me captive, an unspoken promise that this wasn't a fleeting moment. It was an invitation to something more. "I shouldn't," I started, my voice trembling. Us, it's complicated. You're my boss." He smiled softly, a small curve that was both reassuring and mischievous. "Yes, I know. And yes, it's complicated. But some things are worth the complications, Olivia." His words hit me like a physical force. Worth it, worth the risk, worth facing the storm of emotions I had spent months trying to hide. I realized then that my heartbreak had created space in me, not just for pain, but for the possibility of something new, something alive and urgent. The bar seemed to shrink around us, the clinking of glasses and low laughter fading into insignificance. For the first time in weeks, I felt seen. Not just the version of me that showed up to work on time and smiled politely in meetings, but the raw, vulnerable, messy version I usually kept locked away. "I don't even know your name," I whispered, half in disbelief, half in awe. He chuckled softly, the sound warm and grounding. "It's Ethan," he said, "and I've been Ethan all along. Just someone you didn't notice in the right way before. Ethan. The word felt strange and familiar in my mouth. It was no longer just the name of a boss. It was the name of someone who had broken through my defenses, someone who had unexpectedly become my anchor in a storm I thought I had to weather alone. I took a shaky breath, letting the tension in my shoulders ease just slightly. Ethan, my words faltered. I wanted to confess everything, my heartbreak, my fear, the strange hope that had been growing quietly in my chest since he first handed me that tissue. But I couldn't find the right words. I only knew that I wanted more. More of this connection, more of his understanding, more of the warmth that seemed to radiate from him without effort. He reached out again, this time brushing his thumb lightly across the back of my hand. "You don't need words, Olivia," he said gently. "Just let yourself feel." And so I did. I let the grief and the longing and the trembling hope mingle in a single, cathartic wave. I realized that for the first time in months, I wasn't just surviving. I was opening myself up to comfort, to understanding, to a connection that was both unexpected and undeniably real. The bar lights glinted off the glass in front of us, and I felt a smile tug at my lips despite everything. Ethan leaned just slightly closer, his presence comforting and electrifying all at once, and I knew that this moment, the chance encounter that had started with a tissue, with a small act of kindness, was the beginning of something I had never dared to imagine. It wouldn't be simple, it wouldn't be without risk, but for the first time in a long time, I felt the thrilling, terrifying, beautiful possibility of love again. And in Ethan's steady, unwavering gaze, I realized that sometimes the people we need the most are the ones we never see coming.